right, ladies and gentlemen. So, if you look today, I've handed this sheet out to everybody. It says we're looking at federal economic policymaking. Whew, that's blurry. Okay. So, in terms of the job that Congress does, probably the thing that is most encompassing of their time is the budgetary process. And you guys have been like several times in the last couple of years, you may have heard about things like the government shut down and stopped working, like they closed all the national parks and the Smithsonian and all these different things shut down. We're going to work to try to understand how all of that can happen. So in the next two class periods, we are going to talk about some things that are economics related. It's like kind of like the macroeconomic part. We're going to touch on a few things that you learn in economics, but we're going to look more about the political implications. Some of it's super complicated. I'm going to do my best to make it just kind of like very basic. What do you need to know as a voter? Okay? What I've given for you here, these are all vocabulary that you could potentially be responsible for. And I've organized it for you into the different portions and the different things we're going to talk about. It's going to take us 2 days, so we're not going to get through all of it today. If you look on your table in the little red buckets, I've provided the vocabulary cards for you. So as we're going through, if you don't catch what I say and you feel like you want to write down definitions, they're there. It's straight from the Quizlet, but it's up to you. But just know that they're there if you want to use them as we're talking through. Please, 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 please interrupt me and ask me questions, okay? And for me, to be honest with you, yes, I'm trying to prepare you for a test, but man, I feel super strongly about this. Like, you need to know what Congress does. Like, you need to, as a voter, hold them accountable. Because if you leave with nothing except the fact that Congress is in charge of the budget for over the next 2 days, I'm happy. Because that's what you have got to remember, is the media does not present this accurately. Because most people don't really understand it. And so you've got to understand who is responsible for what in terms of how our money is spent. Okay? All right, so we've got 3 basic things that we're going to look at. We're going to cover our policymaking institutions. We want to look at how we manage the economy in terms of growth or contraction. And then finally, we're going to end up with income security and the role that the government plays there, okay? So we're going to start first with policy-making institutions. So let's just kind of brainstorm here a little bit, and you can shout stuff out so I don't have to call on you. But what are the things you already know in terms of the president and the Congress in terms of what they do in relationship to economic policy? For example, who has the power to tax? Congress, very good. What part of the Congress is responsible for taxation initially? Rachel, this is for you. The House of Representatives, right? Okay, who has the power to regulate business that goes on between the states? Congress, we call that commerce, or the Commerce Clause. So you guys have already looked, I guess what I'm trying to get at, you've already looked at a lot of powers that Congress possesses. When you did that little activity last class and you had the blue cards and you were looking at all the powers of Congress, a ton of them are economic. But the president also plays a role. There are certain things that the president does do. A lot of times, what's up? Yeah, go ahead. A lot of the times that is, it's simply like approval of that. Okay? So on this first slide, what I've got for you is, and this is straight from your textbook, but this is the timeline of the budgetary process. And so I'm going to walk you through it. You need to know the generals of this. Like, you do need to know, like, kind of overall, like, what does this budgetary process look like? You need to kind of know, like, the different players and that sort of thing. So let me just walk you through it. Stop me if you have any questions. You can take notes there about, like, what the different components do, if you like. Okay? Okay, so we require our president to actually submit a budget to Congress the first Monday in February. Big press conference, they call people together. The president will very ceremoniously talk about his budget. But when you listen to him, what he's doing, he's talking about what he hopes to accomplish. I want to streamline bureaucracy. I want to invest in infrastructure. I want to take care of working class families, like a lot of political rhetoric. So it's basically the president's goals. So the budget, his budgetary proposal is most assuredly a budget, but it's a budget that has it has political goals in it. Like, if you sit down and write a budget when you're going to college, you're like, okay, I have this much money for textbooks, and I have this much money for food, and this much money for entertainment. It does that, but it says, I have this much money for entertainment because I want to achieve these things. I have this much money for textbooks because I want to do blah, 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 blah. So it's like a marrying of the political goals and the budgetary necessity. Okay? Okay, so then February 15th, this is super important. I mentioned this to you last class. Remember I told you about CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office? They're a support agency of the Congress. Remember, they are unelected people. They're economists. They work for Congress, basically. And they do this. They submit economic projections to the House and Senate budget committees. They're telling them, this is what we think is going to happen with economic growth. This is what we expect to happen with unemployment. This is what your revenues should look like. And they lay it all out there for them. Okay? By April 15th, there's kind of some irony there, Congress passes what is called a budget resolution. Budget resolutions are the max amount of money that Congress is saying they're going to spend in the different categories of the budget. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like there are 13 categories, and I don't know why that number's in my head, but it has to come from somewhere. So they have these categories of spending, and they say, okay, based on what CBO has said, we're going to spend X amount of money here, X amount of money here, X amount of money here. So tell me, what about the president's budget there? What impact do you think the president's budget has there on what CBO does and what Congress does for budget resolutions? Is there a Brian in here? Kiara, I remember your name. Sorry. Okay, so what impact do you see that the president's budget has here on this early work of Congress? Do you see any? No, ma'am, you do not. You never do. So the president says, here's my budget. That doesn't mean anything, really. Technically, if the Congress and the president were gelling and they were working really well together and they were kind of like on the same page, it might be a starting point. But truth be told, I don't know, since this process was created in 1974. Since 1974, I don't know that they've ever even used any of the president's budget. They might have used part of it. And this last time when President Obama presented his budget, they like ceremoniously had a vote to vote on the president's budget. Every single person in the House and Senate voted against it. So I know why they do it, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. Understand that the president's budget is advisory. The president is saying, this is what I hope. This is what I want. This is what I believe our government needs. But Congress, they're the ones that are ultimately going to decide. Okay? All right, so then we have our budget resolutions passed by April 15th. And then after that, we start what is called the appropriations process. So there's that word right there. So when you think about like all the committees in Congress, there is a House Appropriations Committee, and then it has all these subcommittees under it that handle their small portion of the budget. So what they're doing is they're taking that budget resolution and they're now creating like kind of like line items. It's not line item like you and I would think, but it's line item kind of category wise. So like this much money for capital goods, this much money for textbooks. To kind of give you a correlation, so I do the budget for the Social Studies Department. So every year I say to Ms. Costello, okay, I think we need this much money for supplies, this much money for travel, this much money for textbooks, like whatever it is we're going to buy. That doesn't mean when I tell her supplies that I have to say, well, we're going to buy markers and flash drives and, I mean, like I don't have to do that. So Congress is doing that. They're doing like the general kind of like line in there, but it's not uber specific. It's specific, but it's not crazy specific. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay? Then you come up to June 15th. June 15th, we start the reconciliation process. This can mean a lot of different things. Those of you that are kind of interested in this, if you go research reconciliation, what you're going to see is that reconciliation has meant this, and this, and this, and this. It's something that Congress has used to their advantage. What reconciliation was supposed to be, and what it was created to be, was to take the budget resolutions, to take the appropriations bills, and make sure they match up. So it's like an auditing going, okay, CBO said we should spend this much money. This is how much money we think we need. Do they gel? Do we need to make any last-minute changes? Today, reconciliation is often used for political process. It's a last-ditch effort to finally get something added into the budget. For example, the Affordable Care Act was passed during the reconciliation process. So sometimes what we do is we end up adding things like last minute that are budgetary related, but it's because it's kind of like a last-ditch effort to get things in. So I can't tell you 100% what reconciliation will be because Congress makes up their own rules, so they can change their mind as they go. Right. All right, so then they're going to go through, they should have considered all their appropriations bills, and October 1st is when our fiscal year begins. Fiscal year means business year versus calendar year. So by October 1st, if we have not allocated and passed all of these budget appropriations bills through the Congress, then given to the President for signature and have them approved, then we don't have a budget. I don't believe since the 1970s that we've ever passed all those bills by October 1st. So if we get to October 1st and it hasn't happened, then Congress can basically pass, it's like a stopgap. It's like what they do is they say, okay, for the next 30 days, we'll keep spending like we have until we can get it worked out. So it's like a deadline extension in essence, and they can continue to pass those, sometimes for multiple times. What do you think happens if we get to October 1st and the House and the Senate haven't passed these bills or the President hasn't signed them? What do you think happens? The bill will die. Yeah, and so the bill will die, right? But, so when a regular bill dies, it just doesn't become law. If a budget bill dies, what do you think happens? Catastrophe. It's really big, you guys. Come on, what do you think would happen? Government shuts down. So if you get to October 1st and you have not passed those bills, either the House and Senate haven't agreed, like I said, which is what normally happens, or they've done it and the President says no and he doesn't sign it, then that's when the government shuts down. So it's happened in the 90s. It's happened under the Obama administration. Sometimes, like in the 90s, it happened in relationship to Bill Clinton and the Congress. In the 2008, like in this last time, it happened because the House and the Senate couldn't agree. And they were like basically playing a game of chicken with each other, going, you give in, no, you give in. And October 1st came, there was no money. So that means all non-essential offices close. National Park System shuts down. All non-essential military personnel don't go to work. Non-essential federal courts don't go to work. So basically what you need for national security will continue, but other people won't. People don't get paid. So like, for example, like in the military, they have people that perform the payroll function. So your parents, like one of your parents is in the Army, and that they get paid. Well, payroll function of the Army is non-essential. We don't have to have that for national security. So your mom might still have to go to work because her job is that high status, but she won't get paid, and she'll probably kind of like they'll fall behind. So that's what that means, okay? So if we get to October 1st and they haven't, they can pass, like, it's called a continuing resolution. And I'm going to show you a video clip of that in a second. So a continuing resolution says we'll continue to spend at the same rate for the next 30 days. And so that gives us just like an extra opportunity. Okay? All right, so if you look at your paper, we have just covered CBO, okay? We talked about what a continuing resolution was. All right, I just gave you that. Let's go back up here. When you go back to what the President said, it said the President's budget is prepared by the Office of Management and Budget. So on your paper, that's listed as OMB. When we get to bureaucracy, we're going to talk about them more, but you guys, OMB is incredibly, incredibly important. So OMB is right up here. It's the Office of Management and Budget. The President has a group of advisors called OMB. He appoints them. They're not subject to Senate confirmation. They're just his guys, his people. He hires them based